I've been on Windows since XP. That's over 20 years. I've gamed on it, I've worked on it, I basically grew up on it. And in the last year, I finally made the switch to Linux as my full daily driver, and I'm never going back. Before I tell you guys, what to install, let's talk desktop environments, because that's where most new Linux users get confused or just give up. Think of a desktop environment like an automatic or a manual car. Both get you there. GNOME is automatic. Or sorry, GNOME. A lot of people on Linux will correct you on that. It is GNOME. It is not GNOME. Um, but GNOME is automatic. You plug it in, things mostly just work. It's got a clean, modern look. It's got touchpad support, a solid ecosystem. And if you're coming from Windows or Mac, and you just want to get stuff done without configuring a bunch of stuff, GNOME is what I'd point you to, and it's generally polished. This is what the GNOME desktop environment looks like. So it already has like a pre-baked in app menu, taskbar, everything like that. Now, Hyprland, that's the manual. It's a tiling window manager. So, which means your windows automatically snap to a grid, so there's no overlapping. Nothing is set up for you out of the box. You have to write your own config files. You set up every keybind. You decide how animations work, how workspaces behave, what runs on setup. Now, you might ask, why would you want that? Because it's set up for your brain. You can fly. You can barely touch the mouse anymore. You could do Super 1 through 9, which switches work environments. Super Enter, which opens the terminal, for example. Everything I do has a shortcut. It sounds like more work, but it's more upfront work. But once everything clicks, you feel completely different. Everything is so smooth. My recommendation though is to start with GNOME and move to Hyprland once you get a little bit curious, or you get the little inkling like, I want to personalize this. I want to expedite my workflow. Something along those lines, but highly recommend it. This is actually my video on screen, so this is my environment, my config file. But I do definitely recommend it, and I will go ahead and show GNOME again, just so you guys see what the environment looks like compared to Hyprland. And there are other desktop environments. These are just the ones that I recommend and I have the most use with. So now we're going to talk about the actual operating system, the distro. So Linux is the kernel, but there's different distros of Linux. So I'm using CachyOS currently, and that's what I would recommend for the majority of you. Unless you're a developer or something, then like Fedora and GNOME is probably going to be your go-to. But if you're some hardcore developer, I kind of doubt you're watching this video, but it's okay if you are. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But why CachyOS? So like I said, there's hundreds of different distros, but Cachy is built around one core idea, and that's performance. So it ships with a custom patched kernel. The Bohr scheduler, which is specifically tuned for the desktop and gaming workloads. It means your CPU handles task scheduling more efficiently, which translates to lower latency in layman's terms, and in games, and just smoother use and typically higher frame rates. So I will say this, on top of that, it does use Arch, the Arch Linux as its base. So, I mean, you can always flex, oh, by the way, I'm on Arch, you know the meme, everyone loves it. But I would highly recommend this distro. I've tried a lot of different distros throughout my, my search for an operating system that is not micro slop. I will say one of my main things is I wanted to be able to game. I wanted to be able to record videos, and I didn't want to have to deal with a bunch of troubleshooting, and I didn't want to go through the hassle, because previously when I had used Linux, I never used it for gaming. It was more towards penetration testing or something along those lines. So I never really made the leap into the operating system until here recently. And So you can game with it, and I will overlay a video of me doing so. So I was playing one of my all-time favorite games, Chivalry. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. Phenomenal game, and I mean phenomenal game. But here is me loading up the game, or not loading up the game. I'm already in the game, rather. But so you can see my app menu there, and you can see my cursor as well. But I know that this is one of the issues a lot of people have when switching to Linux is if they feel like they're not going to be able to play, games, or their games are going to run bad or whatever. That's most definitely not the case. I play a lot of Counter Strike. I play Chivalry. I play a lot of like indie games as well. Your only real issue, the only thing that's going to give you issue is kernel level anti cheats. So Valorant or anything like that, which if you're looking into Linux and you're concerned about your privacy, you're probably not going to have a kernel level anti cheat or anything that you're not going to give anything kernel level access. But and I could do a whole video on going into why Valorant is just terrible. Any kernel level anti cheat is just why. They don't need it. They're not efficient. But here's a little Chivalry gameplay. I'm just getting it handed to me. I changed class to the rapier, which, if you guys know Chivalry, kind of a devious weapon to use. And but he just leaves. He just leaves. But yeah, guys, this isn't like a gameplay video. I just I just wanted to show you guys that you can do it. You can run the games that you want to play on Linux, with a few exceptions. Whenever there is kernel level anti cheat, obviously, and sometimes they do support. So sometimes, like I know BattleEye, they have a few games that they support to run on Linux. So typically what I would say is anything that is supported for the Steam Deck, or even sometimes not, because you can find ways to run certain games, and like you can go into like creating a bottle and doing all this and that. But just for the ease of use, the complete newbie to Linux, once you install CachyOS, all you have to do, it should automatically detect and install your NVIDIA drivers if you have an NVIDIA GPU. And then you just download Steam. Like, you can do it all through Bazaar. You could do it, I believe GNOME has I forget the name of their app store, but you could just do it all through there. Or you could do it directly through Steam, which is what I would recommend. I would recommend just going to the Steam site, copying the command, and then opening up your terminal and putting it in there. So another thing I really wanted to get into is the security. Like the security, the real advantages of running Linux as a daily driver. So this is either going to get people really interested or they're going to fall asleep. But stick with me because there's real substance here. So on Linux by default, you're not running as an administrator. You're a regular user, and when something needs elevated privileges, you explicitly have to authorize it with your password. And that sounds simple, but it matters. It matters a lot. On Windows, there's a huge percentage of users that run admin all the time, which means any malware that you run under that account gets admin privileges automatically. And I know this is less flattering to say, but it's true. Linux has a small market share. So most malware is written to target Windows because that's where the targets are. That doesn't mean Linux is immune by any means, but sheer volume of active threats you'll encounter in the wild is drastically lower. Sorry. The Linux terminal, though, or the Linux kernel rather, and most software stacks are open source, and that means thousands of developers worldwide can read, audit, and fix the code whenever security vulnerabilities are found. But they do get patched extremely fast. Compare that to a closed source OS where you're trusting one company, internal security team to test and patch those vulnerabilities. It's I mean, you can't beat open source software. You truly can't. And the more that you'll go into this rabbit hole of Linux, and the more that you'll look into, the different applications, like this is, the picture of the iceberg. There, it's the very tip of the iceberg, and there's so much below it. It's very much like that. So like I said, it sparked my interest in school. I was in there for computer network engineering. So I learned, I used Kali here and there back in the day, just for simple, in map and like, you know what I mean? Like very simple attacks on my own network. But it opened the can of worms where I'm like, this is different. I kind of like having complete control of my computer, but that was not as polished as like CachyOS for the end user. Now I will say Linux is not like a magic security blanket. Like if you run random scripts from the internet as root, or if you install like sketchy software, it absolutely can compromise your system. And I know there's a lot of different attack vectors that they use. Like they're using npm packages and AUR packages, which I know that sounds like you might be totally lost by that statement. But when you go to install things, if you have the option or if something has Pacman available, I would definitely use Pacman over AUR if you do go the CachyOS route, that is. But there is a lot of myths that surround Linux itself. And a lot of people say that, Linux is, I know a big stereotype back in the day, not so much now, because they are slowly gaining traction in the desktop environment, like OS world. I think they make up I think it's 6% of the market share right now. But the reality is, people still have the stigma that Linux is only for programmers or hackers, which it's not the case. It's changed so much, and there's so many different flavors, like so many different distros of Linux. Like the use cases are crazy. Like they have, it ranges here. You have like Kali, which is typically the pen testing OS, or like Parrot OS, something like that is, it's going to pre-ship with all the pen testing tools for, security teams, red teams. But then you have something on the other end of the spectrum, like SteamOS, that's just meant for gaming. Like, you can use it as a desktop environment, people do, but it's developed by Steam, it's developed by Valve for gaming. So there's everything in between. Everything in between. You have, like Temple OS, which is, if you've not gone down that rabbit hole, crazy operating system, crazy amount of skill by Terry Davis to create that. But there's so much to look into. There's so much to try. And that's the beauty of this. You don't have to settle. Like I'd recommend, you could always run these in VMs and see what clicks for you. What do you like? You know what I mean? And that's part of the reason that I like Hyprland so much, is because you're able to set up your desktop environment however you want. Like you can change literally every part of the desktop environment. And that's the beauty of it. Another thing is, a lot of people say that nothing works on Linux, which in reality, your browser works, your music works, the video players works, the Office suite works. You have LibreOffice, which is free. You can still use all your Google suite, which I would not recommend, but you can. You can use Discord, Spotify, VS Code, and then all native Linux apps. They're all native Linux apps, rather. The only real fraction or friction points are niche Windows software, only Windows software. So there's like some games that have kernel level anti-cheat, and then there's this, and it's really not that big of a list. Like I mentioned, it's mainly Valorant, I think is the more popular game that I can think of off my head. And I believe Fortnite may have an issue as well, but I'm not entirely sure on Fortnite. I don't personally play it. But another thing is, you have to use the terminal for everything, a lot of people say, which in the reality, especially nowadays, you don't have to. I mean, you could go weeks without opening the terminal if you're on a user-friendly distro. So if you're on something like, GNOME, it's it's more centered around using a GUI, a GUI, so you don't have to use a terminal. You don't have to, rely on it or familiarize yourself with it, which I would still recommend getting familiar with the terminal. And you will over time, like you'll get curious, or you'll want to install something that's not on Bazaar or another app store. But switching to Linux, and this is another myth. Switching to Linux means losing everything. So your documents, your photos, your music, they're all fine. I mean, most file formats will work across platforms. And tools like I mentioned earlier, Bottles, it lets you run Windows applications if you genuinely need them. And I could do a video on Bottles if that would be something you guys would be interested in. But we're gonna go ahead and talk about the reasons why you should switch. And I'll ask you, I'm going to give you some points to think through. If you're curious or you like tinkering, I'd recommend it. If you're frustrated by Windows, ads and forced updates, if you care about your privacy, your control over your own machine, if you game casually and you aren't locked into a game with like a kernel level anti-cheat like Valorant, I'd say go for it, And like I said, you could always dual boot. You could always run it in a VM to see what it's like, to see if you enjoy it, to find your different flavor of Linux. And yeah, my recommendation is just to start with Cachy. Start with CachyOS. It's out of all the distros, all the operating systems that I've used, it runs the best, pretty much regardless of the hardware that you have it on. I would say get comfortable. Get comfortable with the system, learn it. And then when you start to get curious about customization, or if you haven't seen like the Hyprland rice, it's kind of a meme. Then I would look into Hyprland and looking in that desktop environment. But I've been using Linux as my daily driver for a while now. Like I said earlier, I game on it, I record on it, I pretty much do everything on Linux. Is it perfect? No. Does it still have a learning curve? Yeah. But Windows did too when you were a kid. You just didn't notice because you were growing up with it. If this video helped you guys out, hit the like. It genuinely does help the channel. Subscribe if you like this content, or you want to see more of this content. I'll be doing some more videos into Linux, the Linux itself, and then also different distros, how to install it. And if you guys have any questions, I can cover those in a video as well. Coming up soon, I am going to be doing a GrapheneOS install on a Pixel, which GrapheneOS, I'll just throw in this snippet here, and then, GrapheneOS is a security-based operating system for the Pixel device. It essentially sandboxes everything, keeps everything separate of one another, so your different identities don't overlap. And I'll get into that. I'll get into that side of things in that video. But I appreciate you guys watching until the end, and thanks again, guys. Hopefully I see some of you in the comments talking about I switched. I love it. I switched. I hate it. What am I doing wrong? Why did I pick this distro? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? Let me know, But have a good one, guys.